Okay, so today we're going to be ranking all of the starting areas in these Soulsborne games. Now, no, this is not going to include the tutorial areas, just the regular starting area. And honestly, I didn't want to have to make this video. I kind of wanted to bail out, but it's too late. We already committed. I got the gameplay. Now, the reason why I didn't want to make it is because I like every single one of these areas. They're all like S tier to me, so it's going to hurt me to put one lower on the list. But you know what? Mama didn't raise no bitch, so I'm just going to do it anyway. So yeah, people are going to get mad, but you know what? If you do, that's just on you. If you don't understand as to why someone might like some of these areas more than the other ones, then that's just silly and you need to look up the definition of the word preferences. Anyway, let's get started. Now, starting off, we have Ashina Outskirts from Sekiro. Now, the reason as to why this is going to get at the bottom is that because its level design and enemy placements are very basic, and compared to all the other areas in Sekiro, the traversal and the platforming isn't really that crazy either. Now, this is obviously intentional because you're creating a brand new game with the new traversal mechanic and the grapple hook and the jumping, so you don't really want to go too hard with your platforming sections. But even compared to some of the other starting areas, it is actually very linear. There aren't many branching paths at all. You do have that one off-kilted path if you actually want to go ahead and fight that headless boss if you hate yourself enough, and there aren't really too many enemies in terms of variety as well. You kind of just fight the same two different guys that wield a sword along the way. Now, you do have a couple of cool mini boss fights until you actually do lead towards the final boss in the area, and one thing that I do appreciate is that there's nice progression from section to section. You start off in the outskirts and you make your way towards the edge of the cliff, and then you can just do some cool jumping all the way down to like the ice cavern to where you have that really cool interaction with the giant serpent, to which you use the stealth mechanics to make your way through it and just end up impaling it in the eye, which is actually a very cool moment, especially because that From Software hasn't really done anything like this before, which that whole experience definitely makes for the highlight of the area itself. But past this, it doesn't really pick back up at all. It's still more linear section, and even the final boss in that area isn't really too crazy either, but he's definitely weak compared to the rest of the bosses in Sekiro. Number 6, we have Boletaria from Demon Souls. Now, this is why I didn't want to do this, because I love Boletaria. It's a fantastic area, but I had to put it lower on the list. I've been thinking about how to rank these for like the past few days, and this is just what I've settled on. Now, the reason why Boletaria is going to get lower on the list is because it does everything good, but it doesn't do anything the best. All the other areas do one thing in particular that's actually better than the rest. But for Boletaria, I can't really think of one thing that it does better. Now, you can go ahead and say that Boletaria just did everything first, which is definitely true when you compare this to areas of the Undead Bogue in Dark Souls 1. That area just like copied so much of what Demon Souls did. The red dragon on the bridge, guys throwing firebombs from the top of the roof, walking up the stairs and seeing some big ball come rolling down at you. When you enter the very first room, there's a guy directly to your right just waiting to hit you. Having a guy on a platform shoot a crossbow at you while you're fighting off other dudes. Fighting a really strong knight that's hidden around a corner in an area that you don't really need to progress through anyway. You also come across a very happy and joyous NPC knights that you help in Jelly Corporation. The Undead Bogue just stole so many ideas off Boletaria. And in my opinion, I think Boletaria actually just has better level design than the Undead Bogue. There's much more branching paths, there's more shortcuts, there's more open and spacious areas to explore and fight. But yeah, definitely the best part about this area is the multiple different pathways that you can take. Like having the option to just like progress to the area normally, or you can actually go ahead and jump over the ledge using the mechanic that you only really use like twice in the entire game, and just doing an NPC questline and having him just help you out throughout the area and have it all wrap back around to the beginning anyway. And there's even more branching paths than this. You can actually go ahead to like the merchant that's hidden away, or you can just go towards a section that has those two dragons that are there that have some cool items around them. And there's also that cool interaction to where you can hit the chain and have the body that has the item to fall down to the ground, to when you inevitably go down to the bottom using the shortcut, and that item is just sitting there waiting for you. Now, the shortcut itself isn't really much of a shortcut, as it is just like a way that just wraps back around to the beginning. And even later on the other side of the tower, it basically just does the exact same thing. It just opens up to the beginning to where you can just go ahead and fight the boss, which the boss itself is... it's kind of shit, not gonna lie. Now, one other thing that I don't really care much about this area is that there are times where you just walk into one room, then all of a sudden like 17 motherfuckers just randomly spawn. It only happens like a couple of times throughout the section, but it definitely feels very Dark Souls 2-ish. But overall, I think it's a pretty solid area. Number 5, we have the Forest of the Fallen Giants. Now, people might get very upset about this because, like, why would you put Boletaria and Ashina Outskirts below this one? This is a Dark Souls 2 area. Are you stupid? Maybe, but this area is an actual masterclass in level progression. I don't think there's actually any areas out there that do it better than this. There's some that actually do it just as well, but this is actually up there with some of the best. This would easily be top 3 right now, but unfortunately the reason as to why it's going to get lower on the list is because it's in Dark Souls 2. So therefore you have to deal with the fact that every single corner is a trap. You kill one dude, then 17 more just spawn behind you, and every single enemy just has to stagger you for so long and stun lock you for days. It just turns into a very frustrating experience, but that's not to take away from the fact that the level design is an absolute masterclass. Now, the first part about it is kind of mid. That whole lake section that's pretty linear that leads into that big circle area that has 1,000 dudes. That area is kind of cringe, so we're just going to talk about it from the very main bonfire, which from here you can go multiple different paths. The option optional area that you do take in the scaffolding section. It's actually a cool little neat section that you can just go ahead and just rush through, get some nice items, and actually all wraps back around to the beginning with little to no backtracking, which is really nice. And progressing forth through the main path actually does lead you to another rafter section with those rooftops that actually is a little bit more nuanced than the previous section. And this part actually also does lead you into a cave that actually has some NPCs that actually give you some very decent rewards and unlock some very good things. So that makes the exploration and the rewards already good. And then once again, this actually wraps all the way back around to the main path, so we can just pick up where you left off, which it leads into an area that has this guy throwing firebombs onto these explosive barrels, which gives you a hint because you realize there's a bunch of explosive barrels next to a very suspicious looking wall, to which when you throw a firebomb at it, it can explode the wall, and then boom, you have a shortcut. And then from this section, we have 3 different paths, which every single one actually has some very decent exploration. Going into the room with the right with the ballistas actually has some very cool items when you go use the Pharos Lockstone. Going straight and falling for the trap that the Patches wannabe dude set up actually is a cool little section that actually does wrap back around again, and you can speak to him and tell him what the fuck happened. Or you can just take a left and just go straight to the main path, which actually unlocks a shortcut, which right next to that shortcut is an elevator that takes you directly to the boss, which is just amazing design. Don't know why the entirety of Dark Souls 2 didn't really follow this route. Now the boss itself is kind of mid, but the boss does actually drop a key, which actually unlocks a few more doors in this area, which obviously just results in this more multiple paths and more progression and more exploration. And all of these doors that you actually unlock are very close to the main bonfire. So it's not like you have to like progress through half the section just to get to the door that you need to go to. They're all just right there for you. Now some of the areas that you actually unlock it is kind of cringe and shit, but you do unlock some very decent rewards, and you get a whole extra boss as well. And this boss is actually a lot better. And you can even come back to this area later on when you have the cat ring, go through the underground lava section, which also houses some very good rewards. So honestly, I think this section is just absolutely amazing. It just feels like one nice smooth progression. You're not really going to ever get lost, and there's plenty of good rewards to show for it. Has a perfect amount of shortcuts that are perfectly placed, very good unlockable optional areas. You have 2 bosses as well. I think it's just a fantastic area. Number 4, the Undead Burg. Now this area I do care for a lot because Dark Souls 1 is my first game, played it like back in 2014, which is like what, 10 years ago? Wait, 2014 was 10 years ago? Oh my god. Anyway, yeah, the Undead Burg, it's kind of cool. Not gonna let my nostalgia cloud my judgment though, because honestly, it's very basic compared to all the other areas. If you were to take a bunch of people that haven't played any of these Souls games and has made them play the starting area of every single one, I wouldn't be surprised if the Undead Burg was just ranked at the bottom in most of those lists, because it's by far the shortest one and the most simple. Has a bunch of like narrow passageways. It's very linear. There's like a couple of branching paths, which are also very short, but thankfully they do wrap back around to the main path and have some nice natural progression. But even the enemy variety in the Undead Burg isn't that crazy. There's only like 4 different enemies. You have the Hollow, the 2 different undead soldiers, and you have the lone black knight that's there. Which if you compare this area to something like Stormvale Castle, that area has 12 unique enemies and like thousands of different branching paths, which we'll get into. But the good things about the Undead Burg is that the enemy placements are actually really good. It's very intuitive and well thought out. Now the main boss in this section isn't too crazy, but it does have a very cool entrance. And then afterwards you get to go to the bridge where you get to see Solaire, which I guess is pretty cool. Which I'm not gonna lie, even 10 years later, I still don't even care for this guy. But you do also see the dragon on the bridge, which I already talked about in the Demon Souls Boletarian section, and how that the Undead Burg just took so many ideas from that area, and how this stuff is not really that unique or special. And I would like to say that this area is actually fine-tuned to perfection, but I don't think I can even say that, because there's plenty of inconsistencies about this area. There'll be times you walk into a room, just walk up some stairs, or walk through a random alleyway, and it will just lead to nothing, and just nothing would be there. Now you might be thinking, you're just like shitting on the Undead Burg, what do you even like about this? Why is it even this high? And the main reason for that is probably the same thing that makes Dark Souls 1 such a great game, and that's its interconnected world. And that Undead Burg is basically at the center of that. Straight after you kill the boss, you can actually go hit up the ladder that just leads back to the bonfire. And from this checkpoint, you can go to the Undead Parish through 2 different paths, whether you want to go through the bridge or underneath the bridge. If you end up getting the key, you can go to the lower Undead Burg, which towards the end of that area actually wraps all the way back around to the Undead Burg itself via that door that's directly opposite the main bonfire. And if you have the master key, you can actually go ahead to the tower, open up the door to go all the way down to the bottom and fight Havel. And just past him is the Darkwood Garden. So just the way that the Undead Burg just flows nicely into all these different areas, which yes, probably has little to do with the actual level design itself, but I'm still going to give it credit. It's cool, I guess. Number 3, the Higher Wall of Lothric in Dark Souls 3. Now, if the forest was the best at level progression, if the Undead Burg was the best at connecting other areas, then I think the Higher Wall of Lothric is probably the best introduction to a game, and it also gets the best quality of life as well. Now, the reason why I say best introduction, because I feel like it does a very good job at teaching you all the mechanics, teaching you how to fight various types of enemies, learning how the enemy AI actually works. And I feel that it did a fantastic job in terms of enemy placements as well. It doesn't like just litter the area with too many types of enemies. And if they do, it's for a very specific reason. And it does have a healthy amount of traps to showcase what type of game you're actually getting yourself into without obviously being too overboard. Just like this little section right here. You probably don't see the crossbow dude to the right. So when he hits you, you go up and kill him. And then all of a sudden there's like another guy flanking you with a crossbow. Then you go up and kill him. And then 2 more guys come out and flank you. Like this moment right here should really tell you that you should be expecting anything. But the enemy variety is also a very good part about this as well, because all these enemies require a certain type of playstyle to counteract. Like when you're fighting the dogs, you understand the importance of a shield. If you fight the big giant hollow dudes, you understand the importance of backstabbing. You fight the Lothric Knights with the shields, you understand the importance of weapon skills and kicks. And there's even times where the game actually gives you some teachable moments, like below the second bonfire where you go up against that guy that throws the firebombs at the big explosive barrels. And then later on you come across a room that's filled with enemies and a bunch of explosive barrels and you're like, I wonder what I should do. Or when the game gives you firebombs before certain types of enemies, to which you will probably just learn that some of these enemies are actually just weak to fire. Now in terms of like the linearity and the off-beaten paths, it isn't really too crazy. Like right at the beginning of the game, you can either go left or right, and the area to the right doesn't really lead to anywhere else. You kind of have to just backtrack anyway. But once you get to that point halfway through, you have like 3 different sections to go, either to the left or right, which they all end up wrapping back around to each other, or you can just skip the entire thing by just running off the middle. Now, there aren't too many crazy ass shortcuts in this area. There's only like one really major one, but it is a pretty good shortcut at that. But the thing that I like the most is all like the little decisions that they made to make the area just less frustrating to go through. Like having these walls just broken off so you can just like jump off to save yourself just a little bit of time. Like this right here, they didn't have to actually break open this wall, but they did it anyway. I like when you get to this part of the game, you can just like jump straight off the ledge and just skip the entire thing. And then once you end up getting to the stairs, you can actually just walk around, or you can just like walk right up the ledge here. It's these little things right here that I really appreciate, because it just makes successive playthroughs as much more fluid because you can just run through them a lot quicker. Now, the unfortunate things about the High Wall of Lothric is that it doesn't really connect to anywhere else. It's separate from the Firelink Shrine. It doesn't connect to the Undead Settlement. It does connect to the Lothric Castle, and it will be nice if that area was actually accessible very early game, which it actually is if you kill the Dancer, but the Dancer is kind of like a mid to late game boss. It kind of makes it weird that the Lothric Castle was like a lot more accessible earlier on, to just give you that option of multiple different paths to explore, which honestly that would have been a lot cooler, because I feel like that's one thing that the game is really lacking. But overall, the level design is really good, enemies are really cool, the area looks amazing, didn't even talk about that, the aesthetics and the atmosphere are just like on point, and the main boss of the area, Vort, definitely one of the best first bosses that you actually fight in all the games. Really fun, amazing music, cool visuals, so yeah, I like the High Wall. Number 2, Stormveil Castle from Elden Ring. Now, yes, people would be like, Stormveil isn't the starting area, Limgrave is the whole starting area, but like, that's not really comparable. Like, Limgrave is like basically a whole ass fucking game. Like, some games nowadays aren't even as big as Limgrave. That's a whole open world section with a bunch of different dungeons and all these bosses. Stormveil is much more comparable, and it's my list, I get to make the rules, and I want to talk about Stormveil, okay? Now, where do I begin? Okay, this place is just the king of just exploration, period. If you haven't really thought about it before, I'm about to break it down how crazy this level design actually is. I'm just going to start firing off just a bunch of just pros. 1, the area just looks really cool. 2, there's like 4 different NPC quest lines that you can actually do in this section. 3, you can just like run through the entire section if you wanted to in like a minute. And unlike the starting areas in Dark Souls 1 and Demon Souls that only have like 4 different variations of enemies, Stormveil Castle literally has 12 to 13 different types of enemies. But obviously the most insane thing about this area is just the different branching paths and the freedom and exploration that you actually have. Like literally right at the beginning, before you even take a single step into Stormveil, you literally have 4 different paths that you can take. There's one to the right, you can go straight through the middle gate, and there's 2 different paths to the left. And that's just right at the beginning. And if you take the recommended path to the left, you actually get some pretty cool changes in scenery, get to fight some unique and different types of enemies. You also get a bunch of cool rewards, and when you end up reaching the very top level, where the checkpoint actually is, at this point right here, we can freeze it literally right here. I counted this, there's literally 11 different paths that you can take from just this one section. Just this one section alone, there's 11 different paths. And every single one is very meaningful. There's like 2 different sections you can go on the right next to the rooftops. You can go all the way to the top to get the Claw Talisman, or you can go ahead and cross the bridge that wraps back around to the starting area. Or if you didn't want to do that, you can just drop straight down to the courtyard, to which obviously there's plenty of different angles of which you can actually attack this courtyard. So obviously you have so much freedoms as to how to actually clear this area out. But there is like one tunnel there that takes you back to the very beginning of the area. And if you didn't want to take that tunnel, you can just take the main staircase. Or you can just go head inside to the main part of the castle to where there's like 5 more different branching paths, more shortcuts that lead back to the beginning, more different types of enemies with more branching paths, with more exploration and more cool rewards. And if you didn't want to do that, you can just go run ahead straight to the boss. You can go take a right path with the birds, or you can just go ahead and take the elevator all the way to the top and just skip everything. And if you didn't want to go through the courtyard to get there, you can just take the left bridge path, which is like more birds surrounding there, and just scale the rooftops. And on the way, there's actually another hidden area which you can like drop down off the ledge, which leads to a brand new section with there's more enemies and more exploration, and another shortcut that leads all the way back to the beginning. It's like the craziest thing how the game will just reward you with this the most simplest of like exploration. Like even that section just outside the boss room, you just make the decision to just climb up on this little ledge, and be like, okay, let's see where this takes me. Maybe I can get a couple of items. And it just ends up just leading into a whole brand new ass section, like deep underground, that's hidden away from everything else, that has like more unique enemies. And this whole section just adds a new layer of aesthetic and just atmosphere. And also there's just more shortcuts here, and the whole thing just wraps back around to the beginning again. This shit's just fucking crazy. And this whole thing is just like packed neatly in this like one little rectangle. Like, how do they make such complicated level design when the castle is just shaped as like a rectangle? I don't understand. How do they do that? Now, the one thing that I don't really care much about this section is Godric. I don't really care for the boss there. He has a really cool boss arena. The music is cool. Voice acting is nice. The cutscenes are really cool. But mechanically, he's just kind of mid. Too many delayed attacks. Pretty basic, not that challenging. But Stormveil Castle, though, is definitely one of the best areas FromSoft has ever made. Number 1, Central Yharnam. Probably to nobody's surprise, this area is just absolutely fucking flawless from top to bottom, left and right, up and down. It's just amazing. Now, the only downside that I could probably say about Central Yharnam is that there's no other area in the game that is as good as this one. Like, I don't know. Like, there's some areas that come close and there's some really good ones, but like Central Yharnam is just the best one. It just fucking peaks here. Even if you include the DLC areas, this one's still the best. Even like the main boss in Gascoigne in this area is my favorite base game boss. Like, they really fucking knocked it out of the park with this one. But as soon as you step foot into this place, you automatically just recognize the amazing atmosphere that the game actually has. And there's all these different variation of enemies to help introduce combat mechanics. And it just helps teach you the importance of parrying and the rally mechanic, the backstabs, transform attacks. You just like naturally learn these things when playing the game. But obviously the best part about this area is the level design. I don't know how they did it, but there's all these different types of branching paths, and every single one just feels like such natural progression. You just go through one area, it'll end up leading to a shortcut, or end up just wrapping back around, and you just flow nicely into the next area. You just set yourself on one path, and you just end up just like covering the entire map just so flawlessly. There's like no backtracking involved. All the shortcuts are just perfectly placed. There's all this stuff to occupy you with different types of enemies, changes of scenery in every different section, NPC quest lines, and just looking at the level design, it's just so complicated, but I don't understand how they managed to make it that you can just like walk through and like never get lost and then just end up finding your way. I just don't get it. And this place is like the furthest thing from linear. It just makes no sense to me. How do they pull this off? I could probably talk about this for like an extra 30 minutes as to how like amazing the actual level design is. Like how going up one ladder would lead you to one section, then you open up a door, then it leads back to where you originally were, and it's like, what the fuck even happened? How did we even get here? But even putting the amazing level design aside, the environmental storytelling, by noticing all the peoples that are still in their houses as hiding away from all the beasts, and even just the regular storytelling in general with the NPCs, and like one that we don't really need to mention that involves a pig. And to top all of that off, there's literally 2 separate bosses in this area, and both of them are actually really good. And one in Gascoigne that's just absolutely fucking flawless. Definitely my favorite base game boss. I could talk about this area forever, but you just gotta play it to experience it. If you haven't played Bloodborne, like, you gotta do it. Just for Central Yharnam at least. This shit is just an absolute fucking masterclass in level design. Anyway, that's done. I just did a lot of yapping. I'm sorry if I dragged on too long, but I got very passionate about some of these areas, you know, because I actually like talking about just the games in general because I'm a fucking nerd. Anyway, please do like and subscribe. I have some more videos coming along the way, whether it be just Souls related or just... it's just Souls content. Who am I kidding? And don't forget to follow me on Twitch as well, because I am live there every single day doing some challenge runs. Anyway, see you guys around. Bye!